If you are watching this, it means you and I have something in common. You probably woke up this morning. I'm a sleep researcher and I diagnose obstructive sleep apnea. I've made 2 videos already to explain how I measure the brainwaves of somebody who's asleep and also how we measure the apneas through the breathing. In case you missed it, obstructive sleep apnea is a pro-inflammatory respiratory sleep disorder. It is diagnosed by the amount of collapses of your soft tissue of your throat, which leads to events of oxygen stress or oxygen deprivation. On the note of deprivation, other things that this lack of fresh air coming into your body results in is a fragmentation of your sleep or a disruption of your sleep. So if you think you may have sleep apnea, how on earth would you know? Well, I use 3 questionnaires to be able to screen my patients for whether or not they are at high risk of obstructive sleep apnea. The first questionnaire that I use is called a Berlin questionnaire. It is a series of questions divided into 3 categories, and a positive score in 2 or 3 categories means the patient is most likely at high risk of obstructive sleep apnea. This questionnaire has a pretty good specificity, which is really useful because it means in private healthcare settings, somebody can fill in this questionnaire before coming for overnight sleep observation. The Berlin questionnaire asks questions about your snoring, how often you snore, if anyone has ever witnessed you snoring, how tired you are during the daytime, and also asks some general health questions related to your cardiometabolic risk. The second questionnaire is called a stop-bang questionnaire, and that is an acronym for 8 questions which helps screen whether you are at high risk or at low risk. It asks you about your snoring, how often during the daytime you are tired, if anyone has ever witnessed you have an obstructive event, if you have high blood pressure. It also asks about your BMI, which we now know is a pretty outdated way of measuring somebody's health, but it is a good screening mechanism. The third questionnaire we use is called an Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which is right over here. This also measures how likely you are to fall asleep while doing daily activities. Based on the outcomes of these 3 questionnaires, we rate a patient whether they have high risk for sleep apnea or low risk for sleep apnea. And this is a great tool to use before using the overnight polysomnography, which is quite expensive and generally rather inaccessible. In South Africa, the public health system desperately calls for not only these screening tools to be validated in a South African population, but also a point-of-care screening for obstructive sleep apnea in public healthcare settings so that we can eradicate this disease from the get-go and avoid detrimental outcomes in the future. Perhaps you're curious about whether you're at high risk or low risk for obstructive sleep apnea. And being at high risk for obstructive sleep apnea is way more common than you might think. So do not be surprised nor alarmed. Obstructive sleep apnea is treatable, especially with early intervention. So if you do screen for high risk, feel free to go to your local clinic or have a chat with your general practitioner. You're also welcome to ask me any questions in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer them. And if I can't answer your questions, I can help direct you to a place that might.